We're pleased to welcome back to Columbus and to the Columbus Metropolitan Club someone who has spoken here before and in many different roles. Please welcome the CEO of CEO for Cities, Lee Fisher. And joining Lee, come on up, Lee, in a few minutes after Lee's had an opportunity to share a few words with our audience here, will be Columbus Dispatch business reporter Tim Ferrum. Welcome.
Well, I want to begin by saying thank you. I have to admit, because I have not been back to Columbus for some time, I was a little nervous about whether anybody would show up. About 30 years ago, when I first ran for public office, I got a taste of what that feels like. It was a snowy winter night in Cleveland, Ohio. Bill DeMora, who's here today, remembers this because he was with me even then, 30 years ago. I was late to the University Heights Democratic Ward Club meeting, so late that when I got there, everyone had left except for one man in his early 80s in the 7th row. I said to him, "Sir, I am embarrassed that I was late. I got lost. I'm a nervous wreck. This is the first time I've ever run for public office. I have not given a speech since I ran for president of Fernway Elementary School." By the way, I won that election. One of the few that I've won, so I want to make sure you remember that one. And I said, do you mind? I'm so nervous. If I could just get the nervousness out of my system, do you mind if I just go and give the speech? He said, "I don't care. Go ahead." So I get up and I speak, and I don't know how long it was. It probably was 10 minutes. And I said, "Sir, you are so nice. I promise to be back on time next year. Thank you again." And he said, "Son, don't thank me. I'm the next speaker." So I want to say a special thanks to my friends who are here today, this table over here in particular from the Ohio Department of Development, when I had the great honor of serving not only as Lieutenant Governor, but also as Director of the Department, and Lisa Pat McDaniel and Mark Barbash, as you probably know, also served as directors of that department. They're both here today, along with so many of my phenomenal, and I mean phenomenal, colleagues. And I really did not, they did not work for me. I worked with and for them. And they taught me a lot that I apply every day in this job, whether it was Steve Shoney or Patty Huddle or Kimberly Gibson or Kimberly Perfect. The list goes on and on and on. The people like Terry Geer and Susan Lewis-Kaler, who supported me when I was Attorney General, to Susan Jagers and Tracy Sabetta, who worked in all of my losing campaigns, to David Millenthal and Don Garlikoff, who supported all my losing campaigns. All of you, David Leland, all of you have been wonderful friends. And to Bob Milborn, who is a member of the board of CEOs for Cities. So if there's anybody I have to suck up today, it's Bob Milborn. To Doug Kreidler, who, by the way, is the strongest supporter, financial supporter in Columbus of CEOs for Cities and has been a longtime member. And to all of you, thank you very much. I want to begin by telling you a story that I've told some of you before, and that is a story of my wife's father, Mike Zone, who was a prisoner of war in World War II. We often wondered how Mike survived when younger men and stronger men and healthier men did not. But he would never talk about it after he was liberated. And so it wasn't until after he passed, and Peggy and I decided to write a book about his life. He was such an extraordinary man, that one day my mother-in-law, Mary Zone, pulled out of the closet the diary that he had kept as a prisoner of war in World War II. Literally 60 days after they were married in Cleveland, Ohio, he was a prisoner of war at the Battle of the Bulge. And his heart was weakened by it, but his spirit was emboldened by it. And as you read the diary, two things jumped out. One were the stories of the 9 children he would someday raise, one of whom would be my wife, and intricate pasta recipes from an Italian man who loved to eat but had no idea how to cook. No idea. They were so intricate that Mary Zone used these pasta recipes for years to come. How did he survive? He could see beyond the barbed wire. He could see beyond the cruelty of the guards. He could see something that other men could not. He could see his future. And I am convinced to this day that the individuals, the families, the communities, the cities, the regions, the states, the countries that can see their own future are the ones that will succeed now and in future years, decades, and centuries. When I did have the privilege of serving as Attorney General, I used to visit all of Ohio's prisons. And I used to meet men, young men and women behind bars who had no sense of their future. For them, prison was a land beyond pain. They came from neighborhoods where you thought about what you were doing tomorrow or next week, maybe if you were lucky, next month, but not what you would do with your life. And so when I served as the CEO of the Center for Families and Children for 7 years in my hometown of Cleveland, I became convinced that if there's one thing any leader should do, it's to take a few steps back and to imagine what your city or your state could be. So I'm going to ask you to begin today by imagining the city of the future, the city of innovation and opportunity, where the city doesn't have just a vision, but a plan that links and leverages the distinctive assets of both place and people, where there are city dividends, each of which is a clear, achievable, measurable goal and rallying point that creates small wins, or as Livia Brockman would say, strategic incrementalism, demonstrable progress, and sustains momentum. Where there are city vitals, where you can check to see how your city's doing in real time at any moment of the day in terms of its health and its vitality. Where there are clearly defined clusters and hubs of innovation and opportunity, where knowledge centers like colleges and universities and hospitals partner right next door to large and small companies and social and business entrepreneurs. Where if you lose your job, you don't lose your parking place, because you can move right next door in that cluster and get another job because of the ideas and the smart people all around you. Where technology and engineering and science and economic development mix comfortably with art and design. Where every neighborhood is knowable and walkable, and you can buy a quart of milk without having to burn a gallon of gas. Where retail spaces are more of an experience than they are a destination. I didn't just describe the city of the future, I described the city of the present. But so far, no one city is doing all these things at the same time. Columbus is on this list of cities that are doing some of the things that we dream about as a city of the future. But as one of my friends once said, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And as I travel this country, there is not a single city I go to where I don't see a tale of two cities. And I believe that if, as Wayne Dyer once said, if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change. I've come to believe you must look at your city in a different way, as if you didn't grow up here, but as if you were arriving for the first time and see its possibilities. Just about 5 years ago, I had the privilege of being right at this podium to lay out Governor Strickland's and my vision for Ohio's economic future from my perspective as Director of Economic Development for our state. And I spoke about Ohio's first ever economic growth strategic plan, but it really was more of a story of our state's journey from auto glass to solar panels, from steel to wind turbines, from tires to polymers, from gliders to turbine engines and lunar rockets. But less than a year later, I made a choice that I now regret. The choice is surprisingly relevant to what I want to talk about today, namely how to best change the world. Let's go back not 5 years, but 154 years to Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope and the winter of despair. Those words could just as easily have been written today about the critical crossroads that our country stands. It's a tale of two city futures, one of foolishness and darkness, the other of wisdom and light and hope, one of antagonists fighting old wars, the other of protagonists and disruptors exploring new frontiers. First, the foolishness and the darkness. Today, if you're not angry about what's going on in Washington, D.C., you're just not paying attention. Our federal government has never been more partisan or more dysfunctional. Too many of our elected leaders have driven into politically partisan cul-de-sacs and have become trapped in their own rigid ideologies. Ideological purity trumps compromise and problem solving. And as one mayor told me, we don't have the luxury in our city of doing nothing, and neither should they. Every day, Washington proves the old adage that the only difference between genius and stupidity is that genius has its limits. I recently moderated a panel at the Clinton Global Initiative, and sitting next to me was the president of Iceland, Ólafur Grímsson, and he said something that struck a nerve, and I will never forget it. He said, the problem with you Americans is you spend too much time waiting for Washington, which brings me back briefly to my misguided choice. In 2009, I chose to run for the United States Senate. It was a misguided choice in retrospect, not because I lost, because if I had run a better campaign, and if my political timing had been better, I might have won. That's why it was a mistake. Ólafur Grímsson was right. Washington is not the place to change the world today. As Bruce Katz has said, the federal government has left the building. I think that what happens today is that government operates vertically and people live horizontally, which means cities are the new grand game. In a sense, we have to turn everything upside down to get everything right side up. And as Tom Friedman has noted, the job factories of the future, they're cities. So I want to talk about 4 forces of change and 1 big challenge, and then sit down and answer Tim's questions. The first big change is the move to cities. We are in the throes of a sweeping demographic shift from countryside to cities, from drivable suburbanism to walkable urbanism. For the first time in the history of our planet, more than half the people on our planet now live in a city, but they are huddled in cities. Why? Because cities make up only 2% of the Earth's crust. Think of this, 243 million Americans live on 3% of the land, called cities. The global urban population is growing by about 65 million a year. That's like adding 7 Chicagos every year to our urban population. And we generate, that is the cities, 80% of the global GDP. For the first time since the 1920s, urban growth is outpacing suburban growth in more than half of the nation's 50 metro regions. And a diverse new mobile generation, where we at CEOs for Cities call the young and the restless, between the ages of 25 and 34, Michael Logis and a few other people are still in that range, they're moving twice as fast as all other age groups into the close-in urban neighborhoods of Columbus, Cleveland, and Portland. The number of college-educated young and restless has increased 2 to 3 times faster in cities than in the overall surrounding regions. Steve Shoney sees this all the time, as does Mayor Coleman, right here in Columbus, because one of the fastest growing neighborhoods in all of Ohio is downtown Columbus. Another interesting fact, 1.5 million Americans will be turning 65 every year, quadruple that rate just a decade ago. And I call them the retiring and the restless, because they are overwhelming families of child-rearing age. Of the 100 million new households expected to take shape between now and 2025, 88% will be childless. What's that mean? It means that more and more people, especially the young and the restless and the retiring and the restless, are driving less and want walkable urbanism. where they don't have to spend an average of 13 hours a year stuck in traffic. The second force of change is what I call global schmobile, the power of local. The great paradox of globalization is that local has never been more important. When Tom Friedman wrote "The World is Flat," many instantly declared that distance is dead. It no longer mattered where you lived or where you worked. That's absolutely wrong. Geography matters more than ever. In innovation, a company's success depends on more than just the quality of its workers. It depends on the critical mass of the entire ecosystem that surrounds those workers. It's what economists call knowledge spillover. It's well known that college graduates make more than high school graduates, but here is what is not as well known. And that is college graduates in brain hubs, where there are concentrated geographic clusters of companies and knowledge centers, make 50% more than college graduates who work in areas that have innovation clusters. And the same is true for unskilled workers or lower skilled workers. In other words, brain hubs pay higher average salaries to unskilled and to lower skilled workers as well. It's why cities like Boston, in the Boston Innovation District, where I've spent a great deal of time, believe it's less important to try to attract a predetermined formula of industries, like healthcare or electronics, and far more important to attract any company that has smart people and smart ideas, because the magic is in the mix, and the magic is in the collision of people and ideas. We are hardwired to connect and to collaborate. It's one of the reasons you're here today, not to hear me, but because you actually want to see other people and talk to other people. Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, was criticized, I think unfairly, because she wanted employees to work at Yahoo rather than to work remotely. It seemed old-fashioned, but she had it right. While workplace flexibility is very important, the more face-to-face connection and collaboration, the more innovation and productivity. And that's where cities have the huge advantage. The third change is the technology earthquake. More information is being generated every 2 years than was generated from the dawn of civilization until the year 2003. That's mind-boggling. All the computing power of the 1969 lunar landing module is equal to the computing power of a Game Boy in 2000. There are more text messages. By the way, I told my friend Darren Garlikov, do not send text messages during my speech. I will call you out. Steve, Shoni, I will call you out. You're doing it right now. Forget the tweet, okay. Well, here's what I'm telling you. There are 7 billion people on the planet. There will be 8 billion text messages sent today before we all go to bed, and 42% of those text messages, not a single person in this room knows this, but I'm about to tell you today, 42% of those text messages will have been sent by one person, my daughter, Jessica. Many of us read Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat. He wrote it pretty recently, in 2005. But in the book that I'm reading now, It Used to Be Us by Tom Friedman, he points out that in 2005, Facebook didn't exist. Twitter was a sound. 4G was a parking place. And applications were what you sent to college. My point is that things are changing at lightning speed. And as Wayne Gretzky used to say, when he was asked what made him a Hall of Fame hockey player, he said, hey, I just learned how to skate where the puck was going, not where the puck is. So at CEOs for Cities, we believe that a city is smart if it knows that it has a lot to learn. Because no city lacks talent. Columbus is a beautiful example of that. But almost every city, including Columbus, lacks a vehicle for connecting with smart people and smart ideas outside their own city. And if you're not doing that, if you're not being a cross-sector athlete and a cross-boundary athlete, you lose the competition. The key is getting good at spotting the future and putting a pressure test on your strategic plan, because if you think you're done, you're finished. Just ask Kodak, Blockbuster, MySpace, Palm Pilot. As they say in Texas, if all you ever do is all you've ever done, then all you'll ever get is all you ever got. I don't know what it means, but I love saying it. Okay, good. When my son, Jason, graduated from college, Peggy and I asked him, what do you want to do with your life? He said something that I would never in a million years would have thought to say to my mom and dad. He said, Dad, Mom, and I swear to God he said this. He wasn't kidding. He said, what I want to do hasn't been invented yet. And he's right. Today we are teaching young men and women things that have not yet been invented, jobs that do not yet exist, to solve problems that none of us even know is a problem. And as a result, the whole workplace is changing, the whole environment is changing, and we try to focus on that. And one of the things that we have noticed is that there is a differentiator, one thing above all else that makes a successful city. H.L. Mencken once said that for every complex problem, there's a solution that is simple, neat, and wrong. And that is true. But the closest thing to secret the sauce you'll ever get is education. And I speak that at a time in the wake of the defeat of the school levy. But let me explain to you why I say it. If you measure the success of a city based upon the average earnings of those citizens, what economists call per capita income, the research, our research and others' research is clear that there is an unbreakable connection between educational attainment and economic prosperity, particularly for post-secondary credentials and 2-year and 4-year degrees, as Terry Gear knows at Columbus State. And so we did a little calculation. We said, what if you increased the 2-year and 4-year degrees of our nation just by 1%, not 5% or 10%, just by 1%, a doable thing? We would increase the per capita income of the United States of America by $143 billion with the B dollars every year. And if we did it right here in Columbus, you increased what we call the talent dividend by 1% every year, you would increase the per capita income of the Columbus region by $1.5 billion every year. Every governor I know, every mayor I know would love to get a company that brings in $1.5 billion in increased earnings. And yet it's sitting right in front of us. It is hidden in plain sight. So I want to conclude. I really don't want to conclude, but I'm going to conclude. I want to conclude by just saying one last thing. It is my belief that if cities have a goal that they call a dividend, if they have a set of vitals by which they measure their health, if they have a vision, and that vision is not limited by what they know, that city can be great. Columbus is one of those cities. Having lived and worked in this city for 18 years over the last several decades, I'm very familiar with everything that Mayor Coleman has done, or most of what Mayor Coleman has done, and he is, I can tell you right now, and I don't just say this because he's my friend, he is among the 2 or 3 most innovative mayors in the United States. And you get to see that because I get to travel outside of Columbus. So despite the defeat that all of us felt when we saw that levy go down, close your eyes and imagine a better future and have a talent dividend, and you will achieve it. Thank you.
That went better than the first one back in University Heights a few years back.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Yeah.
So talking about personal things, let's take a little step back and discuss how you came to CEOs for Cities, because it's an interesting story, I think. Everybody talks about, bare-knuckle politics. Lee, of course, is known for being a bare-chested politician. Some of you may recall a few years back during a campaign that wasn't successful. You were being shot on video by, I think it was your son. He was doing a documentary. There was a scene posted online. Lee was, I think you were preparing some remarks, a release, a speech, something, and bare-chested. So there was a lot of buzz online, of course, about that. But here you are today, doing rather well.
Well, first of all, in retrospect, that was the high point of my career. Little did I know at the time, but compared to losing, being bare-chested in front of a lot of people, it wasn't so bad. My son, for those of you who don't know, did a documentary film called Swing State that actually won a lot of awards around the country. He followed Ted Strickland and me around the state, but little did I know that he had a secret plan, and that was to do a film not like The War Room, but more like The Living Room. And he did a story about what it's like for a family to go through a campaign. So there were a few moments in the film that were a little embarrassing, but nonetheless, in retrospect, it was a great way for people to understand that it's not all glitz and glamour, and that it is hard work, and frankly, it's the hardest work is the effect it has on your family.
That scene, of course, made very little impact on you and the respect that people have for you. And so after that campaign ended, it seemed to me like, well, Lee will go on and be president of a university, CEO of a company, something like that, and yet you went on to this, CEOs for Cities. Why? Why this?
Well, I respect all of my colleagues in public life who have decided to go back into the private sector and earn money, and there's nothing wrong with that, or to lobby. But that's never been my interest. So when I lost for governor, I went and ran a nonprofit organization, the Center for Families and Children, and frankly, if Ted Strickland had not called me one day and asked if I would be his running mate, I probably would have done that for another several years. And so when I lost for the Senate, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. And that was that I wanted to continue to do what I've made my mission of my life, and that is trying to change the world with small wins. And I got a call one day about CEOs for Cities, and was interviewed by Bob Milbourne, Paul Grogan, the CEO of the Boston Foundation. This is an organization that was founded by Mayor Daley in 2001 to bring cities together, but to focus on cross-sector leaders, not just CEOs. Despite our name, the truth is that if I had been there at the founding, I wouldn't have called it CEOs for Cities, I would have called it Change Makers for Cities. Because we believe it's not your title, it is your attitude that determines whether or not you can focus on city success and be successful. So the bottom line is, it's consistent with what I did my entire life, and I've loved doing it.
So CEOs for Cities, I think you can describe it in a few words as you convening and connecting organization. Cross sectors, not just CEOs, but as you say, arts, government, community leaders, and so forth, and yet started in 2001. It seems like a no-brainer that this organization should have been in existence from the last century, but what took so long?
Mayor Daley came back from a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors one day, and he said, you know, I respect my fellow mayors, but I'm in an echo chamber. I'm just hearing one perspective on what makes a city successful. Why aren't I listening to philanthropists like Doug Kryler? Why aren't I listening to business leaders like David Millenthal and Don Garlikoff, or at least Don Garlikoff anyway, maybe not Millenthal. Or what do entrepreneurs feel, or what do business leaders or academic leaders and college presidents, what do they think? And so we brought all the four corners of leadership, so to speak, philanthropic, academic, nonprofit, public, and for-profit together. And so we've developed a network of cross-sector leadership around the country that are committed to city success, and we share the cutting edge, the smartest ideas, and we do it in four categories. And some of you got this on your table or your chair. I apologize, I didn't have enough because I only thought 7 people were coming. But I will tell you that basically, as the people who work with me at the Ohio Department of Development know, I like to spell out words. I think it's easy to remember. So for example, when we had our Ohio Hubs of Innovation and Opportunity, it spelled out Ohio. So as soon as I got here, I said, we got to spell out a word. Because I said, we do research, but no one remembers it. So the word we're going to spell out is city. And so that's what we did. So we say that there are 4 things that make a city successful, and you'll never forget them after you leave today because they're easy to remember. The C stands for connected. How do you connect your physical, human, digital, and social capital. I, how do you cultivate a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship? T, how do you develop, retain, attract, employ, and deploy talent? And Y, this was a tough one for me, but I was in the shower one day, I got it. And that is, the Y is, how do you focus on your distinctive assets? What makes Columbus different from Portland? What makes it different from Memphis? What is your DNA? What is your brand? And focus on that. If you do those 4 things, which we measure, we believe your chances of city success go exponentially high.
You thought of the why in the shower. You do your best work bare chest.
Leave that one alone.
All right. So that you talk about the city vitals research. How are we doing? How is Columbus faring in the city vitals? It's minute to minute, you say, essentially? Yeah.
Well, first of all, there are limitations to these kinds of indicators. They are sort of just a pressure test more than anything else, because the truth is, all of you would look at this and say, well, why aren't you measuring this, or why are you measuring that? And so we purposely don't aggregate them all and then rank all the cities totally, because we actually think that's not the way to do it. So I will tell you this, that of the 4 categories, the one where Columbus does the best is the T, talent. Just happens to be, by the way, the first among equals, the most important one. Columbus has done a very good job for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is not just Mayor Coleman, but Ohio State University, Battelle, state government, the entrepreneurial culture, the Edison centers. All those things have been attractors of talent, and you've also done a good job of keeping that talent and employing that talent and educating that talent, which is why you score very high in the talent areas. In the innovation area, Columbus does well, but it's not in the top half, it's in the bottom half. In the connection area, it's getting better and better because of the superb placemaking that the city's done, but it's not quite yet up in the upper tier. And the distinctiveness one is the hardest one to measure. The truth is, we have we do this one tongue in cheek. We measure how weird your city is. It's called the Weirdness Index. And what we do is we take a look at the 50 most common consumer behaviors. And we say the cities that deviate the most from these common consumer behaviors are weird. And in our lexicon, weird is good. So I come from Cleveland. Of 51 metro regions, it ranks 51 on the weirdness scale. I live in the most normal city in America. That's not a bad thing, but it means that you need to focus on being a little bit more risk-taking. Columbus is also ranks low on the weirdness scale. We all know plenty of examples where it shouldn't, but the point being that you have to capture that DNA in a way that other people actually see it and understand it. So Austin, for example, has taken their weirdness, made it a label, and with their South by Southwest Festival actually have created a DNA or a brand. The bottom line, though, is that Columbus, particularly in the area of placemaking, is moving up very quickly with the Scioto Mile. All the different remediation projects that are going on here in town are phenomenal, and I can tell you I don't see it in a lot of other cities. Is it East Franklinton and West Franklinton? Good examples. All those examples where I think Columbus actually is moving ahead of the pack. It's got a ways to go, but it's moving in the right direction.
Great. Of course, CEOs for Cities talked of having the kind of the latest and greatest information about various things, and you mentioned briefly that as everyone knows, the schools levy went down in flames. What's the latest and greatest information on what we can do about the schools in light of that? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Well, first, it would be presumptuous of me to analyze why it lost, so I'm not going to go there. But I will say to you, I think everybody in this room knows why it must succeed the next time it's on the ballot. And I will say that my experience in politics, and people like Dave Leland and Dave Millenthal, I hope will agree with me, is that 80% of it is timing and 20% of it is everything else. And so sometimes you can run a phenomenal campaign and lose, and sometimes you can run a bad campaign and win. And so my guess is that part of the problem here was timing as much of anything else. So therefore, in some ways, that's good news, because I don't think that we should take this as a message that those who went to the polls yesterday don't see the significance of having a strong educational system. Workforce development begins with a healthy pregnant mother and a nurtured child. And what happens P through 16 is every bit as important as what happens at those 2-year, 4-year, and advanced degree levels. And so I actually believe that it is the game changer. It will always be the game changer. I'll tell you one quick story that some people in the room know. Not long after I became director of the Ohio Department of Development, I got a call from a company based in San Diego, Amylin Pharmaceuticals. All of you remember this very well. And Ginger Graham, the CEO, said to me, "Congratulations." I said, "Well, what did I do? I've been on the job for 1 week." She said, "Well, congratulations, you're one of 5 states. They've narrowed it down to 5, just because we think your state is well situated for a 500 million manufacturing plant and as many as 500 to 1,000 jobs." And I said, "That's great. So what do we have to do to win the competition?" She said, "Well, the bad news is that we're she didn't quite say these words, but we're in an economic development arms race. You got to put together a series of incentives, loans and grants, tax credits, so we can see whether you're serious." So I went to our team. The team put together a very attractive package. I don't think, by the way, it was as much money as some of the other states, but I got a call one day and she said, "Congratulations. You are now have just gotten the ticket of admission to the game." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you're serious, and you didn't put as much money as some of those other states, but it was an attractive, creative offer. So now, here's your ticket of admission to the economic development game. You're now in the field, but now let me tell you what the game changer is now that you're in the arena and on the field. It's workforce development. If you can prove to us that you can create a pipeline of talent that meets our short-term needs and our long-term needs, then we'll come to Ohio." She said, "This isn't a transaction for us. This is a generational decision. We're talking about the lives of 500 to 1,000 people. We want them to have great schools that start with elementary schools and secondary schools and preschools. And we want to have the technical schools and the community colleges and the 4-year universities listening to us as to what we need." So what did we do? We brought Ginger Graham and her team in, and we did something that people in government usually don't do. We listened. We did not talk. We listened for an entire day to who they are, what they wanted, and then we went back and created a customized curriculum and workforce plan that met their needs. And today, Amylin is one of the great economic success stories in Ohio history.
Tremendous. In just a minute, we'll begin taking questions from the audience. I'll ask another question myself, but if you want to line up by the microphone, and we will do that. Speaking of incentives...
But if there are no questions, I'd like to continue my speech. So that might be incentive to ask a question, because I only didn't get halfway. I mean, I really would like to get the rest. Okay, good.
So speaking of incentives and things like that, one of the issues locally that we've been dealing with and reporting on is poaching. And by poaching, I don't mean letting people come in and shoot deer in your backyard. I mean, there may be some suburb we'll see there's a very attractive IT company 3 miles down the street in another suburb and lure them over and poach from their neighbors. You're a long-time politician, accustomed to the art of the deal, compromise, getting people to talk together. That's what CEOs for Cities does. What do you tell these guys? How do you get them to sit down and see that cooperation and not cutthroat is the way to go?
Well, it's a zero-sum game. Yeah. And in fact, we had a policy at the Ohio Department of Development. We would not give a penny for a company to move from one city or one suburb to another within the boundaries of Ohio. That was clearly antithetical to what we think is economic growth. However, we did offer incentives for companies to stay in Ohio and to come to Ohio. To oversimplify it, economic development has 3 aspects to it: job creation, job retention, and job attraction. And what makes the front page of the Columbus Dispatch is job attraction. But it's the least important of the 3. It's the one that gets the most attention, and it's not to say you shouldn't spend some time on it. But the 2 most important parts of economic development are focusing on the businesses that you already have and helping them succeed and expand, and the most important of the 3, job creation. That is the single greatest thing you can do, to grow a company and make sure there's the follow-on capital to keep the company here and it doesn't go to Silicon Valley. So a disproportionate share of economic development funds need to be spent on job creation, next most important, job retention and expansion, and the least important, that big trophy that gets all the press releases and the attention.
So it is the tradition of the Metropolitan Club to take audience questions, so please state your name, ask your question, and we thank you in advance for avoiding long editorial comments. So,
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Lee. My name is Shirley Billings. I've enjoyed those stories and your insightful comments on cities. I would like for you to, in a fairly succinct way, if you will, list what you would consider the 3 to 5 essential attributes of a smart city.
Okay. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Shirley Billings is a former Cleveland school superintendent. So I know Shirley from her days in Cleveland. Thank you, Shirley. Okay, the 5 things that are most important to a successful city. Number 1, humility. In other words, accepting that no matter how smart you are, and no matter how many accomplishments you've had, there's still more to learn. Because the best cities are the ones that get the fact that they always have to be changing, they always have to be flexible, and they always have to be learning. And I can tell you, it's amazing to me how many cities are reinventing the wheel. Because 10 other cities are doing the exact same thing. Some of them are doing it worse, and some are doing it better. Why wouldn't you want to know both? And yet most cities don't do that. Why? Because we all spend most of our lives on the trees and not the forest. We go back to our offices after work, and there's so much stuff to got to deal with in terms of our inbox, of our emails and phone calls, that we never get a chance to get up a little higher and look at the trees and see what else we're doing. So number 1 is humility. The cities that are actually learning from other cities and actively, proactively working on it are the smartest cities. Number 2, the cities that get the fact that this generation of my son, who is 30, and my daughter, who is 22, no longer do what I would have done, and many of us in this room would have done, and that is go to a city for a job. They go to a city to live and then look for the job. That's not always the case, but it is more the case than ever before. Why? Because they want to be in a city where they can live, work, play, and learn quickly, easily, with fun, and with comfort. Which is why Mayor Coleman has spent so much time on places like the Short North and the Arena District and German Village and downtown and a vast number of areas, because that is actually making a huge difference. It's what in the economic development world is called placemaking. In fact, I remember reading on an airplane one day a Delta Airlines article about Columbus. And in it, it quoted Doug Kreidler, who said, what makes Columbus interesting? And it said, there's an emotional bond, a pride of place. That is absolutely key to the most successful cities, that they have a pride of place, that they actually enjoy going to places. There's something called the power of 10. And that is, if you have 10 different places in your city that are interesting to go to, and 10 different things you can do in each of those 10 places, you've got the power of place. And Columbus fits that bill. Number 3 is it's not enough to educate smart people if you don't keep those smart people and then employ them. So the smart cities have this great creative connection between their educational pipeline, their technical schools, their 2-year schools, and their 4-year schools, and the business community. So that by the time a student graduates, they feel they've been empowered. They feel that they have been embedded in this community. It's too late to start recruiting them their senior year. You start recruiting them within 5 minutes of admission. Because the point is, any student that spends their time in Columbus at one of your companies or one of your nonprofits or one of your organizations for 3 of the 4 years or 1 of the 2 years they are in school, you've just raised the chances exponentially of them staying and keeping their talent right here. And then next, I have no idea whether I'm up to 5 yet or not, but because I just keep going, I probably, let's call this number 4. Okay, number 4 is connect the talent. Doesn't matter how many smart people you have if they don't talk to each other. It's why you have to have places that literally are clusters. Detroit is an example. Detroit is one of the largest cities in the country. You can put Manhattan and 2 other cities in it, and it fits Detroit. So Detroit has figured out, like other cities have too, that you've got to have certain specified geographic areas. Maybe sometimes it's a block. Maybe it's 4 blocks. Dan Gilbert is investing billions of dollars in 4 blocks of downtown. And he's going to make it a brain hub. Tony Hsieh is investing $350 million in all places, not the Las Vegas Strip, but downtown Las Vegas, to make it a brain hub. Mayor Menino, and now the next mayor of Boston, have done that in the Boston Innovation District. The point is, bring those people together like we talked about at the Department of Development, Ohio Hubs of Innovation Opportunity, and establish partnerships. Its proximity is important, but unless you actually encourage and incentivize the collaboration, it's still not enough. I'll stop at 4 because I have no idea where I am. Okay.
And we'll take another question, too.
I'm Don Hollister with the Ohio League of Conservation Voters, and I'm very taken by the booklet you've handed out, The Green Dividend, which focuses on the transportation savings in a city. Do you see cities as specially adapted for other kinds of energy savings, other green dividends?
Well, Don, first I'll say that the number of potential dividends are unlimited. The green dividend is premised on the fact, what if you just reduce the number of miles the people in your city drive by 1 mile per day over the course of a year? What if you reduce poverty, not by 10%, but by 1%? What if you increase college attainment, not by 5%, but by 1%? In other words, if you can establish goals that people believe and are credible and are measurable and achievable, there's something that Teresa Amabile, who's written a book called The Progress Principle, she says the single greatest motivator of human behavior, single greatest motivator, is the ability to see meaningful progress in your work. Not a solution, but to be able to see the needle move. So our premise is by having a city vital that says, for example, if you decrease the number of miles you drive per day over the course of a year, you will have X number of dollars you save in economic savings not spent on buying a car, repairing a car, filling up a car, potholes, paving highways, streets, all that kind of thing. We've done a calculation and show that that would be $31 billion in economic savings to the country, or in the case of Columbus, $330 million a year. We also did the calculation for reducing poverty. And we said, okay, let's say we reduce poverty by 1% in America. That would mean a reduction of about $340 million a year in this country in government anti-poverty program expenditures. We calculated that for every person in poverty, we spend about $19,000 in government programs supporting them and empowering them. We could save a lot of money if we reduce poverty. And all of a sudden, if you see that, you say, okay, that's a goal I can deal with. But then if you simply have a goal and you don't have anything else, that's not enough. So what did we do? We went, in the case of the talent dividend, to the Kresge Foundation. We said, give us some money. We'd like to do a prize competition and see what city in America can raise its educational attainment level the fastest, as measured by 2-year and 4-year degrees. Because remember, I said that's a $143 billion increase in per capita income for the United States. They said, okay, here's $1 million. So we are now administering a talent dividend prize competition. Columbus, by the way, is in the competition. The city that raises its 2-year and 4-year level completion level the fastest over a 4-year period will win this coming fall $1 million. But that's not the beauty of it. We establish a network of these 57 cities, and we get together every year, plus we have a virtual network, and we share the best and smart practices for how to achieve the goal. So the key is, if you have a goal, it's achievable and measurable, and then you connect with other cities in a competition, and you share the best and smart strategies for how to achieve that goal, magic can happen. And in 57 cities around the country today, college attainment rates are going up very fast because of a cross-sector partnership in these 57 cities. They see a measurable goal and they have an incentive of a prize. I don't really think I answered your question, but I wanted to get that in.
So
Thank you,
everybody's
Don.
a winner then, who competes.
Yes.
So everybody's a winner who competes because they're learning more. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark Barbash from Finance Fund. Lee, it's always nice to see you here. The fact that so many people stood up to ask questions doesn't necessarily mean we don't want you to continue your presentation. But let me ask a question in a little bit of a different direction. We talk about Twitter and we talk about, you know, high tech and Gen X and millennials. Pew Research came up with a study the last couple of days that showed a significant disparity in the use of Twitter based upon age, ethnicity, income, a variety of other things. And one of the things that worries me is that in this effort to try to become smart cities, millennial cities that were fraying the safety net. Community development block grant got cut by a Democratic president by 15%. Home money, which is the major support for affordable housing, got cut by 40%. Tax reform will wipe out things like the low-income housing tax credit. And I'm wondering your thoughts on how we look at the other side of this equation, because lots of folks are going to get left behind.
First, I want to acknowledge that much of what I've learned in economic development, I learned from Mark Babbitt. I don't remember his name, but I learned from Mark Barbash when he was Chief Economic Development Officer at the Department of Development. So thank you, Mark. You know, there is a tale of two cities, and every city I go to, I'm seeing this unbelievable creative disruption and renaissance happening in neighborhoods and downtown, led primarily, but not exclusively, by the millennial generation that is not waiting to ask permission, but is just going and doing things, which is one of the most exciting things I've seen in my entire lifetime. But you don't have to walk very far to see those who have been left behind. And it was literally 49 years ago that Lyndon Baines Johnson declared the war on poverty. And although we have made progress, significant progress, poverty is still up from when it was there, and up even as recently as the year 2000. And so the truth is that the best mayors, the best leaders recognize that you have to focus on both sides of the city at the same time. And these days, one of the key issues is housing, because it used to be that food was one of the largest items in the budget. Now today it is housing. And having a place that is safe, warm, dry, has access to good transportation that links them to a job, these are absolutely critical. And if you don't look at a city from the vantage point of the people who need the services in that city the most, you haven't really seen the city. So you somehow have to balance the fact that there's a generation that wants, like Apple said, 1,000 songs in their pocket. This generation, my son, my daughter, wants their city in the pocket. They want to be able to have everything literally within a moment's notice, and often they do. But at the same time, we can't get so caught up in that, even though it's important, that we forget that it's not about building a safety net. It's about building an economic ladder or an elevator so that people can move up into the middle class and enjoy the successes others are enjoying now.
I think Carol has a few things she wants to say before we wrap it up.
I don't know about you, but I love cities, and I think this whole conversation today has been spectacular. So let's thank Lee and Tim for being here.